fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. Better was a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king, who no longer knew how to take advice. For he went from prison to the throne, though in his own kingdom he had been born poor. I saw all the living who move about under the sun, along with that youth who was to stand in the king's place. There was no end of all the people, all of whom he led. Yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is a vanity and a striving after wind.
Cool, thanks, Caleb. Just ask Martin up now to do the talk.
Hey, g'day everyone, and shout out to those who are watching at Newcastle at the Callahan campus. I know there's a watch party there, so I hope you guys have all found one another, and anyone else who's joined us in online, good to have you with us too. Now, get my tablet working. Okay. Also, just to reiterate that invitation to join us for Why Jesus. It was a fantastic first night last week, but there's still 4 nights to go. So tomorrow night we'll be looking at why should I trust the Bible? Can I really believe the Bible? And particularly focusing on the New Testament, what it says about Jesus. I think we had about 13 at the main venue with Merriweather Heights, so there's still a bit more room there for about another 8 people. So if you haven't worked out where you're coming or where you want to bring your friend, then you're very welcome to join me and the rest of us there. But there's also always watch parties, and there's always room for more watch parties. So I'm actually going with that. Okay, well, we're looking at Ecclesiastes chapters 4 to 6. So 3 chapters today. There's quite a lot to get through, but it's good. God's word is good. And what we're going to be thinking about today is envy. Have you ever paused to reflect on just how much of what we do is motivated by envy? How many of our efforts spring from envy? The key text for today's talk is Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 4. Right, this is our key idea. Ecclesiastes 4, verse 4. And I saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Now, this is one of those observations that once you've paused to make it, it seems obvious and irrefutable. Now, what is envy? Well, envy isn't just ambition. I mean, ambition is when you want something, you're striving after something, you want to achieve something. Envy is not just ambition, it's ambition plus competition. It's when we desire comparative success, not just the thing itself. Let me give you a couple of examples. Now, does anyone know who holds the world, or what is the world record, and who holds it for the 100-metre sprint? Surely someone can answer that question. Anyone here? Who holds it? Usain Bolt. Okay, what is it?
9.58 seconds.
9.58 seconds. Yes, absolutely. Was that from the sound desk where you can probably see the slides right in front of you? But 9.58 seconds. It was set on the 16th of August 2009 at the World Championships in Berlin. 9.58 seconds. That is so fast. Now, can you tell me in that race who came second and what was their time? Does anyone at least know who came second? Forget the time. Do you just know who came second in that race?
Was it a French bloke?
It was not a French bloke. It was Tyson Gay of the United States of America, who finished in second place in the time of 9.71 seconds. 9.71 seconds, which is still a phenomenal time. And actually, when Usain Bolt set that world record in 2009, 9.71 seconds was the third fastest time that race had ever been run in history. That was the third fastest 100 metres in history. The first fastest, of course, Usain Bolt, 9.58. The second fastest, I think Bolt had set the previous year at the Olympic Games. But Tyson, he had just run the third fastest 100 metres in history. And no one can remember it. Asafa Powell, he won the bronze medal, also of Jamaica, like Usain Bolt. He ran in 9.84 seconds, and after that race, he said, now I'll have to go home and prepare to run 9.58 seconds. You see, the times of the second and third finishes of that race, they were incredible, and yet rendered almost irrelevant by Usain Bolt's record. There's one example. Second example, in July 1959, American Vice President Richard Nixon, this was when he was Vice President, he travelled to Moscow to open an exhibition showcasing American wealth and technology. Now, it was part of an exchange, so the previous month in June, there'd been a Soviet exhibition in New York. And the Cold War, right, was well and truly on. And here was an opportunity for both superpowers to kind of share something within the borders of the other side. Whatever kind of propaganda they wanted to share with the population of the other side. This was an opportunity. Well, in the Soviet exhibition in New York, the focal point was Sputnik, which was the Soviet satellite that in 1957 had been the first to orbit the Earth with the dog Laika, I don't know quite how to pronounce it, on board. Right? So they were winning the space race at the time, the Soviet Union. But the Americans, so that was the focus of the the exhibition in New York. The Americans took a different approach. They got American manufacturers who sent container loads full of products for the exhibition, cars and clothing and television sets and appliances. And they had books and magazines there, which kept getting stolen by people who came because of all the censorship in the USSR, so they couldn't get books for themselves, so they just stole the American ones. And they had to keep replenishing this. And they had a fashion parade, and they had rock and roll music, but the highlight of the exhibition in Moscow was a full-scale replica of the average American home. And Richard Nixon led the Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, around this home, showing him its luxuries. Fitted carpets, a television in the living room, 2 ensuite bathrooms, central heating, a kitchen with a washing machine and tumble dryer and refrigerator. And as he walked, as Nixon led Khrushchev around this home, he extolled, and this is all being filmed on camera, he extolled the virtues of the American way of life in what's become known as the kitchen debate. The kitchen debate, because part of it took place outside, while they were looking at this kitchen. And the Soviet press it dismissed this exhibition as just as propaganda and mockingly dubbed the house the Taj Mahal. But actually, it was a fairly accurate representation. And in his speech at the opening of the and in radio broadcasts, Nixon, he promoted the American way of life. But rather than focus on democracy and human rights, he focused on money and material progress. And so he said in his opening speech, among the questions which some of you might raise with regard to our exhibition are these. To what extent does this exhibition accurately present life in the United States as it really is? And he went on to say, let us take, for example, our 16 million factory workers. The average weekly wage of a factory worker in America is $90.54. With this income, he can buy and afford to own a house, a television set, and a car in the price range of those you'll see in this exhibit. What is more, the great majority of American wage earners have done exactly that. Putting it another way, there are 44 million families in the United States. 25 million of these families live in houses or apartments that have as much or more floor space than the one you see in this exhibit. 31 million families own their own homes and the land on which they are built. America's 44 million families own a total of 56 million cars, 50 million television sets, and 143 million radio sets. And they buy an average of 9 dresses and suits and 14 pairs of shoes per family per year. Now, did you see what he was doing? He's drawing attention to American progress and ingenuity and saying this has abolished poverty. Modern Americans own all these luxuries. We all enjoy them. And he's saying, this is in language, he's talking in language anyone can understand, the language of money. And meanwhile, Khrushchev, he's furiously trying to deny that all this is true. But the facts Nixon was giving were true. What better way to foster discontent with communism in the middle of the USSR than by boasting of the spoils of capitalism? And what's he appealing to? He's appealing to people's envy. To their envy. Now, Nixon's message was true, but actually it was only a half-truth, isn't it? Because we live 60 years later in an even more prosperous society. Now, our houses are bigger and they're more full of stuff and better stuff, and yet still we're not content. Still we're not satisfied. We're still envious. Prosperity doesn't end envy. We're still grasping. We cling to the delusion that the key to our happiness is found in one word, the word more. More. Now, all of you as uni students are on the verge of a decision that will make your life miserable. It's a decision about what you will do with the rest of your life. And there's a very natural progression from university. There's a default position, if you like. So university is a stepping stone to the upwardly mobile life. Unless you consciously resist it, this is where university takes you. It prepares you for a career. It equips you to walk the corporate treadmill, to run in the rat race, to climb the ladder to nowhere. The decision to join this pursuit is a decision which says, what I have now isn't enough. I need more. Now, where do you get the idea that it isn't enough? Well, you get it by looking at the people around you and seeing what they have. At the heart of our careers, at the heart of our pursuit of success, our restless pursuit of success, lies that terrible affliction, envy. Well, today I want to help you see how you can be freed from the misery of envy. How you can jump off the ladder to nowhere. And this is now our third week digging into the book of Ecclesiastes. The whole book of Ecclesiastes is attempting to answer that question, how should we live? What's worth doing with my life? And the basic approach in Ecclesiastes is to look around at the world, make observations, and draw conclusions. Now, a lot of the observations are introduced with a phrase like, I saw something under the sun, or again, I saw that, isn't it? But I saw he's observing things. And then drawing conclusions. Many of the conclusions in these chapters have the form of, better is this than this. One thing's better than another. And so he's made this observation about envy in 4 verse 4. I saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. That's kind of his assessment of the whole, right? But there's the observation about envy. And then his conclusion. The best life is a life of moderation. Verse 5. Fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. Better one handful with tranquility than 2 handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. It says the best life is a life of moderation. But verse 5 there, the empty, if your hands are empty, the empty hands of the idle will starve you. That idleness will lead to your ruin. But the full hands of a workaholic, in verse 6, well, they'll exhaust you. You're exhausting yourself in vain. What's better? One handful with tranquility, a life of moderation, a balance between work and rest, between labour and leisure. However, that's just one of his conclusions. There are quite a few conclusions in chapters 4 to 6, and many other little observations. But the big theme I want to suggest to these chapters is the life of envy and ambition. See, all of us, Ecclesiastes says, are engaged in a threefold pursuit of more. First, we want more status and recognition. And you can see these points on your outline. That is, we strive to make our name the greatest. At the end of Ecclesiastes chapter 4, the writer tells this little story about 2 people. In Ecclesiastes 4 verse 13, there's a poor but wise youth and an old but foolish king. And the youth is better off, the teacher says, because his wisdom helps him advance in society. So even though he might have come from the most humble beginnings, in verse 14, even from prison or poverty, he rises to the kingship. He ends up supplanting the king. And then verse 15, I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before them. He reaches the pinnacle of popularity. Verse 16 pictures him standing in front of this sea of people, everyone following him. Much of what we do is an attempt to win the esteem of others. We want people to think well of us. Our self-esteem is often so fragile that we need to elevate ourselves. We try to find ways to elevate ourselves in the eyes of others. We can't bear for other people to have a low opinion of us. And so, maybe you do this too. We tidy up the house when people are coming over to visit. Because we don't want them to think, we're living in squalor. So if you come into our house at Wednesday morning for a prayer brekkie, that's the best it ever looks. Because we've got a mad frenzy tidying it the night before. Especially tidying if my mum's coming over, because her house is always immaculate, but then maybe she's doing her own tidying before we come over. Now, actually, guys living in share houses, please tidy up your house before people come to visit. But no, we want people to think well of us, right? Many of us do a personal tidying up before we go to church. Close the door on whatever argument was taking place at home before we hopped into the car or out of the car, or on our greed or our selfishness. We try to make ourselves respectable while in public view. We want reputation. Now, if anything, the last 20 years have made this problem even worse. Because now there's this whole additional realm of life where we can tally up likes and comments and shares and followers. There are all these ways of assessing people's opinion of us. Unlike the poor but wise youth in Ecclesiastes 4, universal esteem is probably beyond most of our reach. Like, we're not going to have these seas of people, masses of people admiring us. But nonetheless, each of us will have our own particular groups that we want to impress. And within which we want to rise to a position of preeminence. So I want to invite you to do a little self-reflection. Which honours are you seeking? And so that others will think well of you. How are you trying to do this? Is it through academic achievement? High distinctions and first-class honours? Is it through success on the sporting field? Is it through artistic or musical acclaim? Do you want to be known as the sharpest wit among your peers, or admired for your style and your physical beauty, or lauded as the most zealous for God? A few moments, I think, of honest introspection should be all it takes to admit that there's some sphere within which you secretly desire your name to be the greatest. In none of those things is it enough to do well. What we really want is to do better than our peers. That drive to be the greatest can even be so strong that you're willing to cheat and compromise to get there. Lance Armstrong finished first in the Tour de France, which is like one of the most grueling bike races annually. But he finished first in the Tour de France an incredible 7 times in a row from 1999 to 2005. It was one of the most amazing sporting achievements ever, and yet he's been stripped of every victory because it was later revealed that he'd been taking performance-enhancing drugs. So driven to be first that we'd even cheat to get there. In what field do you wish to excel, and what are you willing to do to get to the top? Well, there's our first pursuit. We strive to make our name the greatest. Secondly, we strive to make our voice the loudest. Now, chapter 5, the first part of chapter 5, makes this observation that most of us just really, really like the sound of our own voice. Ecclesiastes 5, verses 1 to 7. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. Go near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools who do not know that they do wrong. Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven and you are on earth, so let your words be few. A dream comes when there are many cares, and many words mark the speech of a fool. When you make a vow to God, do not delay to fulfill it. He has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill your vow. It is better not to make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth lead you into sin, and do not protest to the temple messenger, my vow was a mistake. Why should God be angry at what you say and destroy the work of your hands? Much dreaming and many words are meaningless. therefore fear God. Now, the specific context here in these verses is when you go to the house of God. The teacher observed that when Israelites gathered for corporate worship, their tongues just kept getting them in trouble. Making hasty vows, gushing forth foolish speech, deluding themselves with their own words that they dreamt up. But I think we can broaden this observation to cover other situations in life. Just think back over conversations you've had today or conversations you've had this week. What do you remember about those conversations? Isn't it true that for most of us, it's easier to remember what you said than what the other person said? We're better at speaking than at listening. We like our own voice more than we like other people's voice. Now, just to prick your bubble, the people you were speaking to, well, they prefer their voice too, so that they can't remember what you said. So at least if you remember it, someone does. But, we're enamoured of our own opinions. And to consider again the developments of just of the last 2 decades, activities such as blogging and podcasting and platforms such as Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat, as soon as they've sprung up, they have instantaneously embedded themselves in our culture. Most of you probably barely remember anything else a time before these things. Why? Because we just love any opportunity to express ourselves, to have our opinions heard. And what's more, we want our say to be the one that carries the day. Back when I was in high school, I did debating as an activity, a co-curricular activity. And on our debating team, I was always third speaker. Now, if you know anything about debating, each team has 2 teams and each has 3 speakers. And you know what's so good about being third speaker? Because the best thing about being third speaker is that you get to have the last say. And I love this. I thrived on it. I love tearing down the arguments and the entire case of the other team. I love that my voice could be the one that was ringing in people's ears at the close of the debate. And I wanted to hear the adjudicator say, the other team was winning until the third speaker came and just demolished their case. It wasn't enough for my team to win. I wanted my voice to be the decisive one. Now, look, you may not be as proud as I am, right? You're probably not. But not by much. Not by much. I'm sure each of you has your equivalent. All of us have this ambition for more influence and control. We strive to make our name the greatest. We strive to make our voice the loudest. But there's also a third path in our pursuit of more. We strive to make our goods the grandest. Now, our society is sick with materialism and greed. That can't be denied, and it should appall us. But greed isn't a new thing. It's a universal phenomenon. And it's probably the main ambition that these chapters of Ecclesiastes are addressing, written 2,500 years ago. This ambition for money, but it's a desire that is insatiable. To look at some verses that I think we read before in the first talk, but look at them again. Ecclesiastes 5 verse 10 to 12. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. To the owners except to feast their eyes on them. The sleep of a labourer is sweet, whether they eat little or much. But as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. Let me ask you a question. Your present standard of living, are you happy with it? You have everything you need, and many things you don't need. Your standard of living is probably not that different to your parents', really. You've got lounges and a fridge and television and microwave oven. Your standard of living is vastly superior to almost everyone who has ever lived. So are you satisfied with it? Do you have enough? Well, if you are satisfied with it, then when you graduate and start earning the big bucks, why not give away everything above your current level of income? Well, you've already got enough now. Do you need more money? Or will you use that money to buy nicer lounges and a bigger TV and a newer microwave? And where does the desire for those things come from? Well, in large part, it's from envy. Because when you leave uni and start working, you'll no longer be surrounded by other students who have battered lounges and second-hand cars and fridges that sound like they're about to take off. You'll be surrounded by people who are climbing the ultimate ladder to nowhere, and you'll start to envy them. Thousands of years ago, the teacher noticed these observations of life that are as true today as they've ever been. All toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. It's envy that drives our pursuit of more, our threefold pursuit: the pursuit of eminence, influence, and affluence, the pursuit of prestige, power, and profit. And a university education will give you a leg up on this ladder to nowhere. It will give you a title, a prestigious title: teacher, lawyer, manager, consultant, doctor. You'll be positioning yourself in the world so that others must listen to your voice. And it will help you make lots of money. However, while Ecclesiastes paints a portrait of the natural path of life beyond uni, quite possibly it already describes your life now. Now, here's a cartoon I came across almost 30 years ago now. It's in the New Yorker magazine in May 1991. Oops, oh yeah, I'm seeing something different on my screen. But there we go. It shows an electronic device with dozens of buttons and levers, which all bear the label more. Such an accurate description of our way of life, isn't it? We want more. More than what we at present have, more than what our neighbours have, just more. That's why it's so important for us to absorb the message of Ecclesiastes, because it'll help you avoid that miserable life of envy and ambition. Because our ambitions are harmful both to ourselves and to others. Our ambitions hurt people. First is 5 verses 8 and 9. Look at those verses with me. Ecclesiastes 5 verses 8 and 9. If you see the poor oppressed in a district and justice and rights denied, do not be surprised at such things. For one official is eyed by a higher one, and over them both are others higher still. The increase from the land is taken by all. The king himself profits from the fields. Now, the point of these two verses is this. There's a hierarchy in our world with various officials and officials over them and the king over everyone. But that hierarchy of our world is a network of oppression. See, the land produces a limited amount of profit, which must be shared by all. How will the land's increase be distributed? Well, people in power carefully watch over those under them and squeeze as much profit out of them as they can. And those at the very bottom are oppressed and trampled down because they've got no one below them that they can squeeze money out of. So they're left just with a bare minimum. Now that's this kind of, it's a fairly cynical observation, but it's often so true, isn't it? This hierarchy of oppression, where people cease to be treated as people, the whole setup dehumanising, just using people. People reduced, they're not people, they're just workers, they're labourers. Well, all they're about is producing gain for those who are above them. Well, nothing much has changed today. Just that in our networks of oppression in our society, we're so good at neglecting the humblest members that we don't even see them. Or our ambitions, our envy harms others. Our ambitions also rob us of contentment. Rob us of contentment. Ecclesiastes 6 verse 7. Ecclesiastes 6 verse 7. Everyone's toil is for their mouth, yet their appetite is never satisfied. Never satisfied. The more your life is ruled by envy, the less content you'll be. Envy can never be satisfied. And there's two reasons envy can never be satisfied. One reason is that there will always be more people to envy. In the 1830s, a French lawyer and historian was travelling around America and observed America in the 1830s as this prosperous country and prosperous society, but with a terrible malaise. And in his book, he wrote a book called Democracy in America. In this book, he included a chapter, Why the Americans Are Often So Restless in the Midst of Their Prosperity. And here's one thing he said. When inequality is the general rule of society, the greatest inequalities attract no attention. But when everything is more or less level, the slightest variation is noticed. That is the reason for the strange melancholy often haunting the inhabitants of democracies in the midst of abundance, and for that disgust with life sometimes gripping them, even in calm and easy circumstances. You see what he's saying there, what he's suggesting? We envy most those with whom we can compare ourselves. So if you were a peasant living in medieval Europe, your situation would be so fixed and immovable that you wouldn't envy the nobility. No comparison could be made between the medieval peasant and the medieval noble. But in a modern democracy, we can conceivably envy anyone. As we climb the ladder of achievement, rungs that formerly were out of reach now loom before our eyes. These ever higher levels of achievement constantly come into view. There are supposedly, in our modern society, our democracies, there are supposedly no natural or social limitations to ambition. So we'll never lack someone to envy. That appetite for advancement, once aroused, is insatiable. Now, there's actually a deeper reason for this. There's